his socialist fairy tale version of the ideal America where the government coddles its citizens from cradle to grave, and as a result, they succeed in life. If you just want to go directly there, it's BarackObama.com/life-of-Julia, and that'll take you to the page where this slideshow begins. So the first slide is Julia when she's 3 years old. Now, maybe what Obama doesn't tell you is maybe Julia wouldn't even have been born. If her parents had taken advantage of a government-financed abortion, maybe she would never have made it out of the womb. There's a good chance that if her parents did decide to avail themselves of that abortion, it would have been because they couldn't afford to have a child, because after all, they were struggling to pay all these taxes in this weak Obama economy. And plus, they were so frightened at how much it was going to cost to raise a child, and they barely had any money left over after working. Maybe her husband, the father, was working 2 jobs that could barely make ends meet. The mother had a job. Who had time to raise a child? So they decided to have an abortion. So let's imagine that she escaped that, and so she managed to be born anyway. And President Obama is making a big deal over the fact that at 3 years old, she's going to be enrolled in a Head Start program to help get her ready for school. Because of steps President Obama has taken to improve programs like this one, Julia joins thousands of students across the country who will be starting kindergarten soon. Where she really is in daycare. And why is she in daycare? Why doesn't her mother want to spend time with her 3-year-old daughter? Well, the reason is she doesn't have the luxury of that time because the economy is so bad and she's working so hard, even though she'd prefer to be at home. But Julia's father just doesn't earn enough money after taxes, so she can't stay at home and raise young Julia. So she's forced to stick her into some government school where she could be indoctrinated at an early age. Then they skip over to a 17-year-old Julia. They totally skip over all of her years in government schools. Apparently, she emerges as some kind of honor student. It says that under President Obama, of course, again, now she's 17, so somehow President Obama is still the president. Maybe he declared himself king, or maybe he cloned himself, and his clone ran for president. But anyway, under President Obama, Julia takes the SAT, is on track to start her college application. All right. Now, maybe she actually needs remedial work. Maybe that's the problem, because she spent, so many years in a government school and learned absolutely nothing. Of course, her parents paid through the nose for this free education because their property taxes had to rise every year on their small house that they could barely afford because they were underwater in their mortgage the whole time because the economy was so lousy thanks to the government. But of course, had we had private sector schools, the property taxes would have been a lot lower and the cost of private tuition would have been much lower than the property taxes they otherwise paid. And then she might have actually got a decent education because maybe they would have had a merit pay system. Maybe the teachers in the private schools would have actually cared about how good a job they did because they were held accountable. If they did a bad job, they could be fired. You see, in Obama's America, no matter how incompetent the teachers are, you can't get rid of them. Anyway, but let's assume she makes it out of government schools and, she takes her SATs. Okay. Now what happens to Julia? 18. Under President Obama, okay, he's still there. As she prepares for her first semester of college, Julia and her family qualify for President Obama's tax credit worth up to $10,000 for 4 years. Julia is also one of millions of students who receives a Pell Grant to help put her through college. So in other words, because of Obama's programs and because of student loans, college is now costs a fortune. And so because college is so expensive, Julia has to take on enormous loans, of course, with the government's help. So now that when she graduates from college, she's broke. She's got a negative net worth. She's got a mortgage, but no house. See, if the government wasn't there, college would be very inexpensive, and Julia wouldn't have to borrow all this money to pay from it. So because of Obama, she's going to start off her life way behind the 8 ball with a mountain of debt. And of course, because of all the student loans, and no one really cares, what your major is, maybe she just majors in, sociology or something. And so when she's graduated, she's so hopelessly in debt that the only thing she could do is move back in with her parents. Julia's 22 years old. Okay, under President Obama, okay, he's still president. It's another 4 years. Anyway, so under President Obama, during college, Julia undergoes surgery. It is thankfully covered by her insurance due to the provisions in the healthcare reform. Yes, of course, without this provision, she would have obviously died of whatever illness she had. I mean, she would have been uninsured. In fact, when you go to school, you don't, there is insurance. When, a lot of times part of your tuition, the colleges pick up insurance anyway. It's not like the people that were going to colleges paying tuitions just were uninsured. And if they got sick before Obama, they just dropped dead. Although maybe, by the time she's 22 and the government has fully taken over the healthcare system, maybe if Julia does get sick in college, she ends up dying because the waiting line, is so long to actually get the treatment that she needs that she dies waiting for this government-funded operation. But anyway, in this story, the government doctors do a good job, and they actually cure her. She's 23 years old now. Because of the steps like, the Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, Julia is one of millions of women across the country who's able to get a job. Okay, what the president is saying, if it wasn't for this Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, nobody would hire Julia, or if they hired her, they'd force her to subsist on low wages because, of course, the world is full of feminists out there, or people who would discriminate against women. And if it wasn't for the president and this act, she'd have no chance of getting a decent job. And we're going over this fairy tale. We're at age 23, where she has just landed her first job thanks to the government. After all, if it wasn't for this Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, she couldn't have found a job because all these employers would have discriminated against her or paid her hardly anything simply because she was a woman. But thanks to the government, that type of discrimination doesn't happen. Of course, if anything, it backfired because potential employers were afraid of being sued, that she had a harder time finding a job because of this act, and she ended up working for even less money. Of course, remember, Julia is now 23 years old. How many years in the future is this? How large is the national debt? Her personal share of the national debt under President Obama's clone, or whoever is, how president is still a president back then, is skyrocketed. In fact, the national debt is now so large because of all these Obama programs that Julia's taxes have gone through the roof. In fact, the payroll taxes have doubled. The income taxes have doubled. Even if she gets a good job, there's nothing left after paying taxes, not to count all the money she has to pay in her student loans, which is why she had to move back in with her parents. And of course, she doesn't have her old room back, or maybe she does, but she's sharing it because two other families have also moved in with Julia's parents, because now we're living like 3 or 4 families to the house because the taxes are so high. And imagine how much it costs just to heat that house. Imagine what gasoline cost by the time Julia is 23, after all those years of additional inflation to finance the Obama welfare state. She's 25 years old. After graduation, okay, so she graduated at 25 now. So she stayed in school till she was 25. She started at, 17? That's how many years is that? Can you imagine how much money she's borrowed? I mean, her student loans have got to be enormous. Can you imagine what college tuitions would be if the government subsidized it for that long? I mean, it'd be unreal. But let's see what happens when she finally graduates at the age of 25 with piles and piles of government debt into a disastrous economy that's mired in debt. Let's see. Under President Obama, after graduation, Julia's federal student loans are more manageable since President Obama capped income-based student loans payments and kept interest rates low. He was able to keep interest rates low all the way until 2030, or when is she going to be 25? How did his artificially low interest rates policy get rolled over that many years? In fact, by then interest rates have skyrocketed, and poor Julia is probably just going to default on these student loans and look to pass the bill on to the taxpayers. She makes payments on time every month, keeping her on track to repay her student loans. Yeah, right. That's a pure liberal pipe dream. There's no way that's going to happen. Oh, now she's 27. Okay, let's see. Under President Obama, for the past 4 years, Julia has worked full-time as a web designer. Yeah, that's assuming she could even get a job in the Obama economy, which I don't even want to make that assumption. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that there is one job left in the Obama economy, and Julia happened to land it. Thanks to Obama, her health insurance is required to cover birth control and preventative care, letting Julia focus on the work rather than worry about her health. Yeah, what Obama doesn't tell you is that health insurance is now so expensive, she has no money left over for anything. In fact, now that she's no longer buying birth control in the free market, but getting it for free for the government, birth control costs her more than ever before. In fact, birth control costs a fortune. Because of the way it's being provided by government. And of course, since she's got all these free birth control pills, maybe she picks up a few venereal diseases because after all, why bother with condoms? We get free pills. And of course, her sex partners know that. They know that she's got free birth control, so they don't bother buying condoms either, which probably explains the next slide. She gets pregnant. Yes, maybe all the free birth control didn't quite work. Maybe because it was free, she didn't really take care of it. It says, under President Obama, Julia decides to have a child. Well, did she decide or did she just get knocked up? Throughout her pregnancy, she benefits from material checkups, parental care, and free screening under health care reform. Yeah, I don't even think she could get any health care by then. But here's what's interesting. Julia is now 31 years old. She's obviously never gotten married, and she's ended up having a child, either planned or unplanned, out of wedlock, right? As if the liberal establishment doesn't want to offend women by somehow saying that they need to have a man in their lives, that maybe they need to get married before they have a child. So this, ideal liberated woman, career girl, doesn't get married and just decides to have a child on her own, as if she can actually afford to have a child with what little pittance remains in her paycheck after she finishes paying the elevated taxes necessary to service the welfare state and the legacy of debt brought on by years of Obama budgets. Remember, he's still president. And, of course, the crippling burden of her student loans. Oh, here is Julia with her one son growing up as a child of a single parent, no father anywhere in sight. Under President Obama, Julia's son Zachary starts kindergarten. The public schools in their neighborhood have benefited financially, and the great teachers because of President Obama's investments in education. The problem is by then we have no money for education because, see, all the money goes to paying interest on the national debt, mainly to the Chinese and the Japanese. And so the kindergarten that poor Zachary is going to is more, isn't like a school at all. It's more like a prison. Just that, nobody is learning anything. It's just a bunch of juvenile delinquents. I mean, plus, imagine a Zachary there, growing up, he doesn't have a father. His mother is struggling to get by. She doesn't have time to raise him right. And, so he's probably just going to, grow up and be a delinquent, or who knows what's going to happen to this poor Zachary. But, I doubt Julia even would have had Zachary. Most likely she would have, again, had a government-paid abortion because there's no way she could afford to bring a child into the world in the utter poverty that would characterize her life, in the 30th year of the Obama administration. Now she's 42 years old. 42. Okay. Still not married, I don't think. Under President Obama, Julia starts her own web business. Yeah, I doubt it. I mean, I don't think she could even save enough money to start her own business, considering all the taxes and interest she's been paying her whole life. But anyway, she starts her own business. She qualifies for a fall small business loan. Nah, the Small Business Administration is not giving out loans anymore because they're broke, right? There's no money left for the Small Business Administration. But anyway, let's just assume that somehow, 40 years into the future, the Small Business Administration is actually there. President Obama's tax cuts for small businesses like Julia's. Oh, what tax cuts? I mean, the tax cuts that we made today, or is he going to be cutting taxes 40 years from now, too? I mean, today's tax cuts would have long since evaporated. I mean, there would be massive tax increases to pay for all the spending that we had today. But it says anyway, because of Obama's tax cuts for small businesses like Julia's, she's able to get started. She's able to hire employees, creating new jobs. No, she's not. She can't afford to hire anybody. President Obama has made it so expensive with all these mandatory health benefits and, of course, all these new laws that have been passed over the last 40 years to protect workers. There's no way that Julia could possibly afford to hire anybody. Even if she was starting her own business, she would be outsourcing all those jobs to some other country where they didn't have nearly as much rules and regulations. Of course, I don't even think she could afford to start that company, but to the extent that she did, there's no way she'd hire anybody here. She couldn't possibly afford it, and I doubt she could even qualify, for all jump over all the hurdles that are required because of all the rules and bureaucratic red tape. It's pretty much impossible for anybody to start a new business. And then it skips to 65. She's enrolling in Medicare. Everything has been great. What they don't tell you is that small business that she started went bankrupt because maybe she initially got audited by OSHA and she had all these violations that she couldn't pay her. Maybe the IRS came. Maybe the IRS audited her and she lost a fortune and her business collapsed because of all the regulations and all the taxes and all the things that the government did to her. But no, Obama thinks that somehow that she was able to survive this onslaught of government to make it all the way to the ripe old age of 65, where presumably Medicare is still there waiting for her. Imagine that. When she's 65, Medicare was long since bankrupt by the time she reached 65. I mean, look at where the unfunded liabilities are now. Everything is just so wonderful when the government is there to hold your hand and help you along the way. Anyway, we are at the point where Julia is 65 years old, and according to this narrative, under President Obama, Julia enrolls in Medicare, helping her to afford preventative care and prescription drugs. Remember, she's 65. Obama is still president. What a nightmare. Can you imagine living under another 65 years of President Obama, or rather an army of presidential clones? But in any event, according to him, Medicare still exists when this woman is 65. I mean, not a chance, not on your life. In fact, if Julia was banking on Medicare, there's nothing there. She's broke. All she can hope to do is wait in a long line to get some kind of third-rate health care from the government. In fact, if she actually got sick, she needs to go to another country. She needs to try to leave the country to get health care someplace else where they don't have socialized medicine. But, who knows? In fact, as far as I'm concerned, Julia doesn't live in America anymore anyway. She split the country sometime in her 20s because the economy was so bad, she had so much debt and she couldn't get a job that she left. And then she doesn't even live in America anymore, and she wanted to get out of Dodge before they jacked up the cost of those expatriation forms. So she's not even here anymore, right? She left a long time ago, as with every other hardworking American. I mean, I would. I mean, would you want to live under 60 years of Obama tyranny? Not on your chance. I mean, I think people have long left. But, of course, it gets even worse because then when she's 67, again, I guess we haven't raised the Social Security age at all, right? I mean, she's retiring at 67 years from now. And it says under President Obama, he's still there. Julia retires. After years of contributing to Social Security, she receives monthly benefits that help her retire comfortably without worrying that she'll run out of money. No, she has no retirement. Anything she contributed in Social Security was already blown by President Obama. There is nothing there. In fact, she can't retire. She has to work every day till she drops dead. Although, as I said, work what? Doing what? Because the economy is a complete disaster. It collapsed long ago. There is no way that this bubble can even go. And in fact, the only way that she could possibly collect Social Security taxes is if her poor son Zachary is having pretty much his entire paycheck confiscated to pay Social Security benefits. Of course, then there'd be nothing left of poor Zachary's paycheck to cover interest on the national debt. What about that? Have we defaulted on our bonds by then? Or is the country been completely destroyed by hyperinflation? I mean, this is a complete fantasy drawn up, based on some guy who has no clue what is going on. But of course, the real insult here is that the President of the United States thinks that what is necessary for success is government and government programs. How did the Julias of the world succeed 100 years ago? or not, and somebody might say, well, the Julias were moms. They weren't in the workforce because they weren't liberated yet. All right, well, how did the Johns of the world succeed without government help? How did they get educated, right, without all these government grants? How did they get jobs without help from the government? How did they start businesses without help from the government? How did they retire without help from the government? You know what? They did it better. It was easier. They got better jobs. They were more profitable in business. They retired with a higher standard of living before the government got involved. I mean, this is a disgrace. I would love to see the Romney camp come up with an alternate version of reality, because every step of the way, if you look at all these slides, all these great things that supposedly happened to Julia because of government, none of it would have been possible if Mitt Romney had been president, because he would have undone all these good things, and Julia would have probably died a long time ago because she wouldn't have had any health care. She couldn't have got a job because she didn't have government laws protecting her from discrimination. She never would have started her business because she couldn't have got a government loan. In fact, she probably never would have even graduated from college because she couldn't have afforded it because the government loans wouldn't have been there. So her whole life would have been a complete ruin were it not for government. Of course, nothing about free market capitalism, about entrepreneurship, about the invisible hand, about how wealth is really created. Because in President Obama's Twilight Zone world, this bizarro world, the economy grows not because of those things, but because of all the things government does. Meanwhile, where did the government get all the money to do all these great things? Right? They had to take it from Julia, and they had to take it from her son Zachary. And the truth is, the government took away from Zachary and Julia's parents far more than it delivered to them in terms of benefits. Again, it's like government aid or government benefits. It's like you get a blood transfusion from your right arm to your left arm, and you spill half the blood on the floor. Yes, Julia's blood, Zachary's blood was all over the floor as the Obama administration bled them to death. And that's really how the life of Julia unfolded. In fact, maybe when she got to 65 and she realized that she was broke because of all these years of participating in a government Ponzi scheme, and because she wasn't feeling well and the lines were too long to get government medical care, that she ended up putting a bullet in her head and put herself out of her misery. Maybe that's how this story actually comes to an end.